Thank you. My name is Louis Harper. I'm a presenter. I guess my presentation was moved up to 2 o'clock. That's fine with me. Are we ready to start?
Yes.
Okay, just by way of introduction, I'll introduce myself, and I'm going to be sharing my time with Walter Spence, who will do his presentation. I guess we have 1 hour, so in half an hour he'll come on and introduce himself. First of all, I'd like to thank for inviting me to your gathering, and a little bit about myself. My name is Louis Harper, and I'm from Garden Hill First Nation. I started my high school in Toronto, and I finished in Winnipeg. Then I went to Brandon University, graduated there, and went to Ottawa University, graduated with a Bachelor of Law, and I'm currently a lawyer, a practicing lawyer, and I'm an executive director part-time at Treaty 5 office in Winnipeg. So that's by way of my introduction. I want to start off my presentation with a little video, a 2-minute video by one of our youth at Treaty 5 territory. And he talks about reconciliation and talks about decolonization and empowerment process, and how the youth would like to participate in the reconciliation process into the future. So I'll turn the video on right now. I'll turn to the next slide.
Tense, Wapasum Kakosa Netakosa Kinepoat Harper Nintin Scath. Good morning. I've been asked to be here this morning to speak on reconciliation and what it means to me as a youth. Reconciliation in the dictionary means the restoration of friendly relations or to restore it to friendly terms. As youth, we need to do our part in decolonization and reconciliation, to be a part of the empowerment process, eliminating discrimination and racism, and rebuilding our institutions based on our values, our traditions, and our ways. As we are aware, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission investigated and dealt with the treatment of residential school students and survivors. The recommendations stemming from the Commission, known as the calls to action, were mostly directed to the governments concerning Indigenous peoples. As a youth, I believe the reconciliation movement is a good thing because it acknowledges the damages that have been inflicted on our people. The damage has been huge because it continues today to impact youth and will continue if we don't do anything about it. Nevertheless, the long path toward reconciliation has started. There's been many Truth and Reconciliation Commissions around the world that look into the atrocities on human life. Commissions are set up to look into different kinds of situations, such as the effects of war on Indigenous people, or even the deliberate killing of Indigenous peoples through government policies. In Canada, the human rights violations that existed at residential schools led to Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2008 to 2015. As a youth, I've committed myself to the challenges that face all of us, now and in the future, such as the lack of education on our histories, our beliefs, customs, and the lack of understanding on decolonization and reconciliation in our schools. I cherish the idea of a place where all people live as one, in peace and harmony with equal opportunity, just as Creator intended. It's an idea that we should all hope to live for and achieve.
So that's the presentation that he did when he was 16 years old. I think he's 19 years old now, going to university. But it sets the tone of my presentation on reconciliation. And to me, this is about the reconciling or reconciliation of our pre-existence as societies, as nations, with the sovereignty of Canada or the Crown. I believe we're sovereign people and have been before the treaty signing and after the treaty signing. But I'll talk more about that later. But I want to start off by talking about our office. I don't know how many of you heard about our office, but we've been in existence since 2017, actually. And my PowerPoint, I'll be following my PowerPoint. The resolution was passed in 2017 at a Chiefs gathering in NCN, the Nissitchawasee Cree Nation. And it asked, the resolution asked if the chiefs of Treaty 5 would be interested in going into a process on governance. So a resolution was passed endorsing two projects at that time. One was nation rebuilding, and the other one is recognition of Indigenous rights and self-determination process. And so after the resolution was passed in 2017, in 2018, on January 30, 31st, and February 1st, 2018, the chiefs gave directions. These are the Treaty 5 chiefs, gave direction to have dialogue with the Crown on governance, in particular how to remove ourselves from the Indian Act. So that's the purpose, main purpose of our existence is to address alternative governance other than the Indian Act. So I want to talk more about our first project, that's nation rebuilding. And that involves talking to the people on nation rebuilding and looking at new governance structures and government models, and how to remove ourselves from the Indian Act. I note here that it's a 5-year project, so it'll end in 2024. The second project we have is called the Recognition of Indigenous Rights and Self-Determination. As opposed to the first one, to talk to the people, this one is to talk to the government. It's a roundtable discussion on chosen topics. So Canada and Treaty 5 chose the following topics to discuss. That's natural resources, including NRTA, child welfare, fiscal relations, nation-to-nation relationship, treaty annuities, and self-government models, what we call Ogamawan models. Ogamawan means, in our language, government. So those were the two main projects we started off with, but we added a third project, which is child welfare project. The purpose of this project is to talk to our people in Treaty 5. It's an exploratory process. If we were to establish new child welfare structures, how would they like to see it structured? The two things that we've come across so far is that a lot of our people want to talk about the inherent and custom child welfare practices and hence models, to develop models based on inherent and custom practices. And the other process is the Canada's child welfare reform legislation, Bill C-92, that process. So we're sort of doing two things under child welfare, and that is looking at two processes, one based on sovereignty and the one based within the framework of the Canadian legislation or the legislation and the Constitution of Canada. So those are the three projects that we're doing. And I wanted to emphasize them, the projects, and the reason why we have an office in Winnipeg. So I want to talk a little bit more about the inherent right to self-government. And as you know, that the certain commissions or studies in the past have recommended self-government for First Nations. So in 1995, the inherent right of self-government policy was introduced, but it went against the beliefs of First Nations, how self-government should be. They always say that we are sovereign before treaty, and after treaty signing, we're still sovereign, and that's the basis of our self-government. But that didn't sit well with the government of Canada. In 1996, Royal Commission on Aboriginal People recommended building a larger government as part of nation rebuilding. So like what we have today, we have smaller communities. What RCAP recommended is creating nations, nationhood. And so for example, the Cree nations, all the Cree communities would come together to form a government. That's the notion that was recommended by the Royal Commission. In 2016, the Justin Trudeau government came into power, and they adopted this idea of nationhood building, and so they started the projects. Actually, they established tables across Canada, and last count there was about 160 tables on nation rebuilding. So for our part, like I said, in 2017, we created the exploratory table called the Nation Rebuilding. And it was the main purpose, our main purpose was to create alternative government systems other than the Indian Act, or to replace the Indian Act. So that's a little background. I want to play a little video again, and this is about the policies that have been in existence for about 150 years. And Rory Hawkowitz, who is deceased now, worked with Treaty 5. I became good friends with him. And he did this little video. It's only 2 minutes long. So I'll play it for you because it explains, the kind of struggles that we face. Hold on.
have to unlearn most of what we already know. We have to unlearn so that we can learn. For the last 150 years, the central goal of Canada's Aboriginal policy was to eliminate Indigenous government, to act as if Indigenous people had no rights, to terminate the treaties, and through a process of assimilation to cause you to cease to exist as distinct legal, social, cultural, religious, and racial entities in Canada. It tried to do all these things. Every single one of them it tried to do. The words I've just spoken are not mine. They're the words of Senator Murray Sinclair from Manitoba. That's what he wrote in the report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. A country that engages in cultural genocide seeks out to destroy the political and social institutions of the targeted group. We're talking about destroying the whole thing of your great-great-great-grandparents. Land is seized. Populations are forcibly transferred. Their movement is restricted. Languages are banned. Spiritual leaders are persecuted. Spiritual practices are forbidden. Objects of spiritual value are confiscated and destroyed. Families are disrupted to prevent the transmission of cultural values, identity, and history from one generation to the next. And Canada did all those things.
So what I'm trying to emphasize is if this is it is the policy of the government this past 150 years. And imagine the challenge we have based on the values or the policies in getting to self-government. So it's not just the negotiations of self-government. We have to look at the mindset of the Europeans. So I want to go over what efforts have been done in the past. Just a summary of it. I don't know how many people, I certainly remember in 1966, the Hawthorne Report. The Hawthorne Report was a report commissioned by the federal government. I believe it was the Liberal government, if I'm not mistaken. And the professor, his name was Dr. Harry Hawthorne from University of British Columbia. And he concluded that Native people were marginalized and very disadvantaged, and recommended that things would be instituted to create processes to improve their lives. In fact, if I remember correctly, he called the Native people citizens plus. So shortly thereafter, the white paper was introduced, and the white paper basically recommended that the government was going to do away with the reserves, to do away with the treaty rights of First Nations, and and the First Nations protested and basically won. In Manitoba, we have the book Wabam as a result of the response to the white paper. In 1982, Section 35 of the Constitution was inserted into the Constitution and recognized our inherent and treaty rights, and also later it was determined that the right of self-government was recognized under Section 35(1). Then the Penner Report was commissioned, and basically the Penner Report again talked about self-government and the need for self-government for First Nations. In 1990, the Charlottetown Accord, probably many of you recognize that accord. Ovid Mercury was national chief at that time, but as you know, the referendum defeated Charlottetown Accord, which would have recognized self-government for First Nations. Then the inherent right of self-government policy was introduced in 1995, and basically that was a way to negotiate self-government and to get away from the Indian Act. In 1996, the following year, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, their report came out and basically recommended that recognizing self-government for First Nations under Section 35(1) of the Constitution. They also recommended this concept that I mentioned before, nationhood or nation rebuilding. And then UNDRIP in 2007 was recognized the self-determination and self-government. I want to read to you what it says in Article 4. It says, Indigenous peoples, in exercising their right to self-determination, have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. So this document, the UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration, as you know, is being introduced in the House of Commons that will further recognize, hopefully, self-determination, self-government. But of course, there's issues relating to that as well, as raised by First Nations. Then the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2015, again there they mentioned recognition of UNDRIP in relation to self-government. So when we talk about self-government in Canada and our process, we have a very, like the spectrum is wide. The government of Canada is saying there's no way you're going to be self-governing in the sense of being sovereign, just like the Quebec issue where they tried to separate from Canada. They said, if you're going to have self-government, it will be within the framework of the Canadian Constitution. And then again, the people we've talked to in Treaty 5 territory, they said, no, we were sovereign before treaty, and we are sovereign after the signing of treaty. So that is the foundation of our negotiations, or the basis of our negotiations. So that's basically my presentation, and I wanted to keep it to half an hour long so my friend Walter can continue with his presentation. He'll be presenting on child welfare. So bear with me, I'll go and get him.
Thank you, Walter. While we wait for Louis to join us, I just want to mention that we will have time at the end of both presentations to have a short time for any comments or questions from those of us listening. So please help me welcome Walter Spence, and he will introduce himself.
I need some help on that.
Well,
So,
okay, if you just click share screen again
I haven't spoken yet.
on the bottom of your Zoom.
Okay.
Oh, there it is.
All right. Good afternoon. My name is Walter Spence, and I'm very happy to be participating on your virtual gathering. I was listening to the presentations, and I want to say I've met some, I haven't seen some of the presenters for some time. First one would be Brenda Westesikut. We're actually childhood friends. Our families grew up together down the flats along the Churchill River, and I haven't seen her for several decades. And then also Dr. Michael Hart. He and I attended the University of Manitoba School of Social Work together. So it was good to see both of them. I'm going to be, so my background in terms of education, again, is a Bachelor of Social Work with the University of Manitoba in the mid-'80s, and then a Master's of Arts with the University of Victoria in the mid-'90s. I also have to say that Marilyn, my wife, Marilyn, and I are the owners of Tika's Boutique here in Manitoba. We have approximately 4 locations in Manitoba. My presentation will be on restoring jurisdiction over child and family. So I've been hired by this office to work on that on child and family, because my field is in social work, and I specialized in northern child welfare for approximately 2 decades. So this presentation, as I mentioned, is on restoring jurisdiction over child and family. I want to look at the historical and political movement, and then I'll share the work plan that we have developed for this office and for Treaty 5. So just basically the history, many of you will know. First Nations in Manitoba were concerned with the number of children being removed from their reserve communities by provincial child welfare authorities. The children were adopted out of province, out of country. The chiefs of Manitoba reached out to the Manitoba Indian Brotherhood for political action to stop the child welfare practice by provincial government. AMC. AMC chiefs lobbied to 2 levels of government with the objective to restore jurisdiction and governance over child welfare to the reserved communities. This political movement led to tripartite meetings of the federal government, province of Manitoba, and the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs. The tripartite meetings led to the creation of Aboriginal child caring agencies on reserve. This means the agencies were run by Aboriginal people, but we had to follow the provincial guidelines with federal funding. Challenges experienced by the agencies in the 80s and the 90s. Even though we operated our agencies, we continue to see the same or worse statistics of children being apprehended and taken into care. Funding was inadequate compared to the provincially operated agencies. During this time, we saw more child deaths while in care. We operated the agencies, but we had no control over the provincial policies and federal funding. The Chiefs of Manitoba continue to assert their voices for more control and ownership of child and family matters by citing their understanding that the master agreement was an interim step towards restoring full jurisdiction, and within 8 years, the arrangements would be reviewed. The two levels of government did not return to the political table. 1990s, the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs in Canada signed a Framework Agreement Initiative. This initiative was to work towards dismantling the Department of Indian Affairs. The spirit and intent of FAI would lead to self-government and full jurisdiction. In 2000, the Aboriginal Justice Inquiry Child Welfare Initiative was created with the signing of an MOU and protocol agreement with both levels of government, Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs, MKO, and the MMF. First Nations view the spirit and intent of the Child Welfare Initiative as moving closer to achieving more jurisdiction over child and family. The next 5 years entail comprehensive groundwork to restructure the CFS system in Manitoba, leading to amending of the Manitoba CFS Act and creation of the Manitoba Authorities Act in 2005 in order for the transfer of responsibilities to the Aboriginal Authority offices and Aboriginal agencies, which allow the Aboriginal entities to have province-wide CFS mandates. The political parties of the process agreed to a governance model with a leadership council enacted in legislation for the respective leaders to meet on a regular basis in order to ensure the restructuring of the CFS system continues. The provincial representatives ended the process in the late 2000 decade by no longer attending the meetings and exerted their powers under the CFS Administration Act by placing some of the Aboriginal authorities and Aboriginal agencies under administration. This entailed removal of agency directors and agency board of directors by placing a provincial administrator to operate the authority office or CFS agency. National First Nations political movement. First Nations leadership across Canada voiced their grave concerns to the Assembly of First Nations in Canada regarding the increasing over-representation of Indigenous children in care of the provinces and territories as a result of the paternalistic and racist government policies and practices. Indigenous children are more likely to be placed in foster care than non-Indigenous children, and the key drivers included poverty, poor housing, parental substance abuse, and domestic violence. The Government of Canada's Child and Family Services agencies delivered services on reserve on the condition that they are delegated to deliver child welfare services by the province and territory where the agency exists. Although Manitoba First Nations have 40 years of administrative control of child welfare, Indigenous people in some provinces and territories never had the jurisdiction of child and family services. Hence, all the decisions were made by government. Federal budget of 2018 announced that the federal government would provide funds for social development. The Assembly of First Nations commenced work by establishing a Chiefs Committee on Child and Family Services and Social, self-determination and a technical working group on social development, which led to the drafting of Bill C-92 in 2018-2019. I believe yesterday you had a presentation on this new legislation by Shirley Allery with MKO. So this will be a repeat for you. The purpose of the act was to affirm the rights of Indigenous governments and organizations to exercise jurisdiction over child and family. Establishes new national standards and principles, which includes the rights of children, best interests of the child, cultural continuity, and substantive equality. In a sense, then, the Act will help shift the programming focus to prevention and early intervention. help children stay with their families and community, placement priority. So anything that we do in regards to First Nations, we have to go to our leadership, usually through a summit or an assembly. And this is the resolution passed by the chiefs of the 40 First Nations under Treaty 5 region. So it's a resolution restoring jurisdiction on child welfare, and that's the resolution number. So it's desirable to have full jurisdiction on child welfare and to engage with our people as to the structure, function, and authorities of a Treaty 5 child welfare institution as part of Treaty 5 governance, and also to create a child and family protection law. So Louis presented the history of our office and the mandate of the office, and especially he led into speaking about child welfare. So it's really, we're doing a lot of exploratory work, community engagement. The Summit of Treaty 5 Sovereign Nations support the exploratory engagement sessions with Treaty 5 nations on child welfare jurisdiction. So we have to look at the structure, functions, and authorities. And you'll see the chief and an elder that passed the resolution. So once the resolution was passed, the office, we had to develop a work plan. So the first phase of this initiative was to engage the 40 Treaty 5 nations in Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario. Start establishing and designing child and family systems by seeking views and input from the local level. Understand the application of the Act. So the work plan is to discuss on a broader scale all aspects of the Act, to conduct community consultation, establish Treaty 5 child welfare systems, and build capacity to establish the delivery models, to secure resources for the process and establishment of delivery models. So this office, we submitted a work plan proposal to Indigenous Services Canada. So we just received notice by email that we qualified under the Child and Family Services capacity building. So just to conclude then, this office is based on restoring Okanagan and related jurisdiction. So again, our resolution on child and family provides a mandate to carry out exploratory discussions on child and family with the following in mind: review elements of child welfare legislation. How do we restore jurisdiction on child welfare? Under the notion, if we had Treaty 5 self-government, how will the child welfare structure, function, and authority would look like? In closing, and you said nations can develop, create, and pass laws, revitalize customary care practices, and these will further replace Bill C-92 national standards and principles, and can be paramount, shared, or vacate authority for children and family. This is all the objective of nation building or nation rebuilding. So we've been challenged with COVID because in order to do this work, you really have to go to the community to do the community consultations, community engagement. So we had to rely on social media. So we've had some virtual summits or Zoom meetings. I started in February, so it's been a challenging undertaking, but it's very interesting when you hear from the elders and the chiefs from the 40 First Nations in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. So this is to conclude my presentation. Thank you.